A series of incidents before and during the filming of a movie about the Antichrist makes it seem like there's more than just coincidence and fate at work here. And then an equally similar story, but more and more people begin to die. This is part 2 of the series about haunted and cursed movie sets, and this is Talk Hollywood to me. Hello everyone and welcome back to Talk Hollywood to me, where I talk Hollywood to you. Sorry that this episode is coming out a little bit later than normal, but I suddenly got sick with congestion and was a bit of a living corpse for a few days. Yes, I am the kind of person that if bleeding out will assure you that they're fine, but when congestion hits, they act like they're on their deathbed. Being dramatic runs in my blood as I was a theater kid, but on the tech side, and am the child of a theater kid. So, Dad, if you're listening, because I know you listened to the last one, hi. And also, how, when, and where are you listening to these? Because you never told me that. And with Halloween coming up, I'd like to suggest one piece of scary media. Find the 2chan forum post, with the first one being titled, "Help, the girl I like won't respond to my emails." Basically, this guy has a crush on a girl called Denko and wonders why she won't respond to the 600 emails he sent. There are more posts from there, and trust me, it gets more and more crazy, and luckily, fortunately, it doesn't end with someone getting murdered. If you're not sensitive to things regarding the stalking and pretty much some borderline harassment, I'd recommend checking it out because Jesus Christ, how is this real? I hope everyone out there has been doing well because my classes are killing me, and yoga twice a week for an hour can only do so much aside from proving I have no upper body strength, and the top hat sucks, as per usual. I wish I was able to do those things they made us do in elementary school and middle school, where you have to hold yourself up by the bar, but I was never able to do that. And no amount of exercising I'm doing has been able to change that, and my body refuses to let me be healthy and will only change when I'm 6 feet under. On the subject of dead bodies, did you know that in the 1980s it was cheaper to buy a human skeleton to use as a prop than a plastic one? Apparently that is the case, which is one of many things that will be covered in today's episode. But before we get to that, we have to jump to the next movie that featured some rather interesting things going on after 1973's The Exorcist. First, I'd like to note something I don't quite remember if I mentioned in the last episode about The Exorcist. If you watch Mindhunter and have watched the second season, you probably already know what I'm getting at. In the film, there is a radiology technician in the scene where Reagan goes to the hospital to get all sorts of fun little tests done. That particular technician is convicted murderer Paul Bateson. To sum that story up real quick, he had hooked up with journalist Addison Verrill, whom he had met at a bar, and Verrill rejected a serious relationship happening. Bateson said he needed money and hated rejection, decided to do something he'd never done before, commit murder. He was eventually arrested, of course, 2 years after the murder, and was suspected of other killings and could be seen as a potential serial killer, but these are mostly false claims. He served 24 years and 3 months of his jail sentence, was released on parole, and we don't fucking know if the dude is still alive or not. Exorcist director William Friedkin said himself in 2018 that the last he heard, Bateson was living in upstate New York, but according to the Social Security Death Index, a man also by the name of Paul F. Bateson with the same birthday and Social Security number died on September 15, 2012. So who knows? We'll probably never know, but, there's that. Murder is fun and all, but you know what's better? Your son being the Antichrist. Yep, now we're jumping into the Richard Donner film 1976's The Omen, starring Gregory Peck, Lee Remick, David Warner, and Patrick Troughton. The plot of the movie deals with an American diplomat and his wife who, unknown to them, has the Antichrist as their child, except he's not biologically their child. Robert Thorne, played by Gregory Peck, was told that their son had died after being born, and is informed of another baby whose mother had died during childbirth. Thorne adopts the child, but does not tell his wife that that isn't their child. Yes, every mother's dream. Raise the Antichrist without knowing. But I'm sure if you just give birth to only sons and or you have mostly sons, you might indeed start thinking that they are, in fact, the devil. Naturally, people die in the movie because of his obviously unholy influence, including a nanny hanging herself at his 5th birthday party, a priest being impaled with a wrought iron pole that came down from the top of a steeple after being struck by lightning, the mother is pushed out of a hospital window to her death, a photographer whose head is sliced off by a pane of glass, keep that in mind for later, and the eventual death of Robert Thorne, who, in the process of trying to kill Damien and rid the world of him, is killed by police who have no idea what's happening and just shoot and kill him. I'm sure you can guess what comment I'm holding back right now. But let's start at an incident that occurred a year prior that led to Peck taking the role of a troubled and conflicted father. Jonathan Peck, Gregory Peck's eldest son, was found dead at his home from a gunshot wound to the head from an apparent suicide on June 27, 1975. Gregory Peck felt compelled to take the role of Thorne, who himself is a tortured and guilt-ridden father, was because he felt those same feelings after not being there for his son and his inability to help him. This incident occurred 2 months prior to filming. Of course, Peck himself also said that he liked that the film was more of a psychological thriller than a horror, and that's why he signed on. However, there's no doubting the parallels here. Filming for the movie took place in England, which of course means you have to fly across the Atlantic Ocean to get there, unless you want to take a slow boat over, which I don't recommend. I say that as someone who once took a 2-hour ferry from Wales to Dublin and got a headache from watching the waves out the window, napped on my arm, and then because I lost feeling in my hand, thought I'd lost my pinky finger somehow. Unfortunately, I cannot say that losing a finger was the least gruesome thing involved in the cast. They say that 3 a.m. is the witching hour in which supernatural things happening is the most prevalent, and that bad things tend to happen in threes as it mocks the Trinity. Lightning can strike one place and no one thinks anything. What if it strikes a second time? What if I told you it struck a third time? On 3 separate occasions, flights on the way to England were struck by lightning. The first victim of this was Gregory Peck, whose flight across the pond to London was struck. A few weeks later, the plane carrying the executive producer, Mace Newfield, was also struck. Newfield called it the roughest 5 minutes he's ever had on an airliner. Sometime later in Rome, Harvey Bernhard, the producer, was very nearly struck by lightning himself, and escape was most likely either a hospital trip or a trip to the morgue. It would surprise no one to know, then, that Bernhard started carrying a cross around on set with him. And he said something rather ominous. Quote, "The devil was at work and he didn't want the film made. We were dealing in areas we didn't know about, and later on in the picture it got worse, worse, and worse." And Harvey Bernhard was right. Now, this supposedly hasn't been verified, but I felt compelled to mention it anyway, so take it with a grain of salt. In another plane incident, it was originally chartered for Gregory Peck to take to Israel before that was taken from him and given to a group of businessmen. If you want to take a guess as to what happened to it, saying it was struck by lightning, unfortunately, would not be correct. It crashed and killed everyone on board. Like I said, this hasn't been verified, the "it crashed and killed everyone" part specifically, but knowing that a plane you were about to take crashed and killed everyone on board would not be good for you and your mental health at all. Kind of reminds me of Final Destination. Love that series. No, I don't. That's a lie. I hate that series. It made me so paranoid. I can't be behind a log truck on the road or use a tanning bed. Unfortunately, at home my parents have one, and every time it's used, I get absolutely terrified. Now, the idea for the story about the Antichrist came from Bob Munger, a friend of producer Harvey Bernhard. Even before the film went into production, Munger had some misgivings about the film, and honestly, who wouldn't? He said, quote, "I warned Harvey at the time. I said, if you make this movie, you're going to have some problems. If the devil's single greatest weapon is to be invisible, and you're going to do something which is to take away his invisibility to millions of people, he's not going to want that to happen." There was also an incident in which a restaurant and hotel stayed up by various cast and crew members who were both by the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, because this was during the Troubles, and unfortunately a lot was happening at the time that led to many people dying. However, different sources report whether or not the bombing happened while a producer was at the hotel, or it happened a bit before they arrived and they happened to stay in a hotel that was bombed. Something else pretty disturbing happened sometime later. In one scene from the movie, towards the beginning, Catherine Thorne, played by Lee Remick, went to the zoo with Damien, where all of the animals were terrified, and Damien went, if I may say so, bananas and apeshit, but sorry. I say that because there are also baboons in the zoo, and Remick was particularly afraid of them, and the shot captured on camera was real. The animal trainer used to help deal with the baboons and look after them died shortly after the scene was completed, being killed by a tiger. According to Bernhard, the trainer died the very next day when the tiger grabbed the trainer's head, and the trainer was killed instantly. As far as further on-set action, nothing more happened. Well, there was one minor injury. A cab driver for Thorne in the movie was played by the son of a mafioso who was determined to get into film, and Gregory Peck accidentally slammed the cab door on his hand, almost taking off his pinky finger. You can see the bandage wrapped around his hand in the film. But if you think it all ends there, that's not the case. The omen continued to haunt and curse others even after its production, and it makes sense that they released the film on June 6, 1976, or 6/6/76, because of course they had to, and of course they did. In the case of both men, it was during work on the 1977 war epic A Bridge Too Far, which was filmed in the Netherlands, which is important to mention. First of all, as a film person, I'm mad no one told me about this movie before, given the amount of actors in the cast that I'm fans of and familiar with. James Caan, Michael Caine, Sean Connery, Elliot Gould, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins, Ryan O'Neal, Robert Redford. No one told me about this, especially when it's about Operation Market Garden and involves the 101st Airborne. Why? Moving on from that, one was special effects artist John Richardson, the other stuntman and stunt coordinator Alf Joint. Both worked on The Omen, and both, like I said, worked on the film. In Alf Joint's case, for one stunt, he was to simply jump from a roof and onto the airbag below him. However, the stunt went wrong. He didn't so much appear to jump as to fall awkwardly and suddenly. He was badly injured and hospitalized. After he awoke, he told his friends that he felt something push him. But in John Richardson's case, the experience he had was fatal. For his passenger, anyway. As Richardson tells it, he was driving to his destination from Holland with his assistant Liz Moore in the passenger seat, oddly enough, on Friday the 13th. But Moore would never make it there in one piece because, as fate would have it, there was a head-on collision with another car. Richardson survived it, but Liz Moore was decapitated, which mirrors a scene in The Omen that Richardson himself designed and orchestrated, in which photographer Keith Jennings was decapitated by a sheet of glass. And for The Omen's curse, the story ends there. You can think what you want of the curse, whether it's real or not, whether the film was doomed from the start, or if it's just an extreme series of unlikely coincidences that just happened back-to-back on set of a movie about the Antichrist. And you can obviously see my bias here. I do believe in ghosts and spirits and the like, yes, but I do try and keep a realistic outlook and weigh things as they come and as I see them. If the Teen Wolf television show taught me anything, it's that 1 is an incident, 2 is a coincidence, and 3 is a pattern. And there's a whole lot more than 3 here. For our next case, it's not as extreme as The Omen, which may make you think that I should have led with that first, but I'm going in chronological order here, and that's just how things are happening right now. The next movie we are covering is the 1982 supernatural horror classic that reminded us that children can, in fact, be incredibly spooky, is the Tobe Hooper film Poltergeist. I should say off the bat that there are 2 deaths of actors that were both in Poltergeist 2 that have, in my opinion, no connection to the supposed quote-unquote curse the film is said to have. Julian Beck, who played the evil spirit Cain, died of stomach cancer in 1985, which was expected as his battle lasted 18 months. The other, Will Sampson, who played the good spirit Taylor, his death was also a bit expected, as due to the actor's weakened state, it was thought that he wasn't going to pull through the heart-lung transplant that he needed to have, and eventually died due to kidney failure and fungal infection in 1987. Sampson was mainly known for playing Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the Native American man who feigned muteness and mercy killed Jack Nicholson at the end. And listen, these movies are old, they've been out for a long time, you can't spoil them anymore. It reminds me of one time many years ago when someone said I shouldn't spoil the end of The Hobbit when the movies were coming out, despite the book being released in, 1937, 82 years ago. You can't spoil that anymore. You just can't. There was a year between each movie being released. You could have read the book. You could have picked up an audiobook, read the plot synopsis on Wikipedia, go on SparkNotes or Schmoop. It's all there. You have the time. No, I am not still better about that. I am not accepting questions or criticism at this time. But moving on. The first interesting thing I should mention about Poltergeist deals with the scene in which Diane Freeling, the mother, played by Jobeth Williams, a Southern name if I ever heard one, was driven to the backyard of the house and into the pool where skeletons suddenly appear around her. And you want to know something fun? Those are real skeletons. Real. As in, those were once people. They were alive at some point. For some reason, getting your hands on a real human skeleton was a whole hell of a lot cheaper than getting your hands on buying a plastic one. I still don't know why or how that is, but it just is. Fortunately for Jobeth Williams, she only found out the truth after the scene was filmed, so she didn't chicken out at the last minute or overthink it, leaving her with plenty of time to overthink it later. But apparently, it was far cheaper to get a real one or a few real ones than make a fake skeleton out of rubber. So they opted for real ones for some reason. I don't know how they came up with that one, but apparently someone did, and they went with it. Maybe the skeletons were related to the supposed quote-unquote curse. I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. However, some cast members were concerned with the desecration of real, actual human skeletons and requested that an exorcism be performed on set, which did happen. Sources differ as to whether it happened on set of the first or the second one, which was performed by Will Sampson, who was also a shaman. And now we move on to the bigger cast deaths. The first to die was Dominique Dunn, who played the eldest child, Dana. At the age of 22, she broke things off with her abusive boyfriend and finally left him, so good for her. Unfortunately, there was a tragic ending. The boyfriend showed up to the house she was living at to beg her to come back to him, begging for her forgiveness. Dunn put her foot down and said no, which apparently the boyfriend was not expecting. In the driveway of the house, he choked her for 4 to 6 minutes and left her there to die. Dunn was in a coma for 4 days and showed no signs of having brain activity. Her parents took her off life support and she passed 19 days before her 23rd birthday. The boyfriend, John Sweeney, though he was acquitted of second-degree murder, was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Sweeney was sentenced to 6 years in prison, the maximum term for that particular crime, plus an additional 6 months for the assault charge that was brought on him. After 3 years and 7 months of his sentence, he was released on parole, but the crime naturally stuck with him, and the public never forgot. He reportedly changed his name to John Mora and lives in the Pacific Northwest. What he is doing today is unknown. There's a lot more to his trial that is interesting, including evidence withheld and the like, so I would suggest you go ahead and read that if you're interested, because if I continue on, this will turn into a true crime podcast, and God as well as the rest of the world knows that there are enough of them in this world. And the second death was that of Heather O'Rourke, playing the little blonde girl Carol Ann Freeling, who was one of the creepiest lines in cinema, especially because it came from an 8-year-old girl. Early in the 1987, during the filming of Poltergeist 3, which in some places was released with the subheading The Final Chapter, O'Rourke came down with giardiasis, please don't ask me to pronounce it again because I won't, and also known as beaver fever, and I will not make the jokes I want to make, and was later diagnosed with Crohn's disease. She was prescribed a steroid to help and continued on. On January 31st, 1988, O'Rourke began to vomit, and the next morning she collapsed. En route to the hospital, she went into cardiac arrest and died later that day during surgery. It was to repair, and here's where we get medical, quote, an acute bowel obstruction caused by congenital stenosis of the intestine complicated by septic shock. In layman's terms, there is a bowel obstruction, which is as plain as I can put that, caused by a birth defect that resulted in abnormal narrowing of the blood vessels, complicated by damage to various organ systems, which led to them failing. Heather O'Rourke died on February 1st, 1988. She was 12 years old. Also, I'm not trying to shade the YouTube channel Top 5s right now, but in the Haunted Hollywood Film Sets video, he said O'Rourke died under, quote, mysterious circumstances and was in, quote, unnatural death in odd circumstances. Like, listen, dude, she had health problems already. She's a kid. I just explained this. Does it suck she had all those health problems? Yeah, it does. No one wants to die in an operating table either, but it does happen. It's not an odd or mysterious circumstance. It's a tragic circumstance. She was 12. Sure, a lot of kids don't go into cardiac arrest caused by septic shock, and that's unusual, yeah, but not unnatural. For a kid, maybe it is. I'm not a health expert by any means. The other deaths, all the deaths I mentioned, are tragic circumstances. They could be the result of a curse or just things that happened. I'm not going to try and scapegoat a 12-year-old or abuse victim or murder victim just to get a point across and twisting to fit my own opinions and viewpoints. I'm not saying the Top 5s guy did that. I'm not at all. Personally, I'm a big fan of his channel. I love his videos, but he could have worded what he said a whole hell of a lot better. Like, I'm a 20-year-old amateur podcaster. This man's been running a channel for years now. How am I doing better than him on this topic? But that's enough of my griping. There are other small incidents that occurred. Brother Robbie, played by Oliver Robbins, was actually choking during the scene where he was being strangled by the animatronic clown. He, of course, survived, but Robbins does not believe in the curse. And not a coincidence, he had a poster for Super Bowl 22 in his bedroom, which did not happen until 6 years later. That Super Bowl was played on January 31st, 1988. Does that date sound familiar to you at all? For anyone that cares, it was the Redskins playing the Broncos, and the former won 42-10, and they played in San Diego. Jobeth Williams also claimed that she would return home after filming to find picture frames that were crooked and go back to being crooked even after she straightened them. This, however, is known to happen with frames sometimes, and my parents may frequently see me fixing 2 of them in the living room because it will bother me until I do something about it. And for the supposed poltergeist curse, that's where it ends, unless you want to count cast deaths that happened some years later, including one in 2009, where an actor with a small bit role in the first movie was axed to death in his home by an ex-felon. And like I've said, whether or not you believe in this curse is all up to you, but in this humble podcaster's opinion, I don't think this one is so much a curse as a series of unfortunate coincidences, unlike The Omen, in which I definitely think some shit was going on. I have noticed, though, that beheadings somehow seem to be a common theme in these haunted cases, which is exactly something that happens in the next case I'll be covering on the next episode. Though that particular movie set isn't haunted or cursed, the amount of laws broken and legal injustice will make you think it was. In the next episode we cover, Twilight Zone, the movie. And that's where this episode ends. If you enjoyed this episode and enjoy my little show, let us here at TealTV and Hawkstream know. And if you want some more podcasts, feel free to check some more out at uncwtealtv.org/Hawkstream. You can find the podcast there as well as on iTunes and Spotify. There are 4 other great shows for you all to enjoy that cover a wide variety of topics, and you will be sure to find one that you like and that suits your fancy. For now, this is Sierra signing off from Talk Hollywood to Me, where I talk Hollywood to you. Hail to the king, baby!